I gave my whole life to my family. I sacrificed everything for them. Yet somehow I became the villain in my own home. And the person behind it all? My own daughter-in-law. My name is Carol. I'm 68 years old. And I never thought I'd live to see the day when my own grandchildren would look at me with hate in their eyes. My grandson, 7-year-old Leo, broke free from his mother's hand and ran towards me, his arms wide open, a smile lighting up the entire school gymnasium. Then, just as he reached me, my son's wife, Emily, caught his arm. She leaned down, her perfect blonde hair hiding her face, and whispered something in his ear. Leo's smile vanished. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear, and slowly backed away. The other parents fell silent, their stares feeling like 100 tiny needles on my skin. Friend, before I tell you about the phone call I received that night, the one that broke a mother's heart, do me a kindness. Tap subscribe so you're here to see what happens when they finally push a good woman too far. I stood there frozen, my arms still outstretched. Emily gave me a tight, cold smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, and guided my grandson away. No one said a word to me. I was suddenly a ghost at my own family's event, an old woman in a floral dress that felt 2 sizes too big. I didn't understand what had happened in that single whispered moment. I just knew that the boy who used to call me his best friend was now looking at me like I was a monster. It all began with one simple lie she whispered. I tried calling my son Kevin, but my calls went straight to voicemail. The next day I drove to their house, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Emily opened the door, her face a perfect mask of polite concern. "Carol, what a surprise," she said, her voice smooth as glass. She didn't invite me in. I asked her what she'd said to Leo, why he looked so frightened of me. She just tilted her head, a confused little frown on her face. Her words were sweet, but they carried a terrible sting. "Oh, you know how children are. They have such active imaginations," she said, quietly enough that only I could hear. She made it sound like I was the one who was confused, like I was a frail old woman losing her mind. She was so good at it, this gentle, polite cruelty. It was a poison you couldn't see. I knew arguing would only make me look worse, so I just nodded and left, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. I decided to drop off a birthday gift for my granddaughter later that evening, just to leave it on the porch. But as I approached the house, I saw the living room light was on, the curtains not quite closed. I heard voices, my son Kevin's and hers, and I stopped. That night, I overheard something that froze my blood. "She just doesn't respect me as a mother, Kevin." Emily's voice drifted through the window, filled with a fake, trembling vulnerability. "She gave Leo 3 cookies before dinner after I specifically told him no. It's like she wants the kids to love her more than me." My heart sank. I had given Leo 1 cookie, hours before dinner, after he'd finished all his homework. It was our little tradition. But she had twisted it into a weapon, a story of defiance and disrespect. I heard my son sigh, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I'll handle it, Em," he said. "I already told her to give us some space." The next time I saw my grandchildren at church on Sunday, the poison had taken root. My granddaughter, sweet little Maya, hid behind her father's legs instead of running to hug me. Leo wouldn't even look at me. I tried to smile, to show them I was still their grandma, the one who made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs and read them stories until her voice was hoarse. I knelt down, trying to catch Leo's eye. "Hi, sweet boy," I whispered, my voice cracking. He finally looked up at me, his bottom lip trembling, and his face was a mixture of confusion and hurt. He took a small step forward, away from his mother's watchful gaze. And then my grandson asked me a question no child should ask. "Grandma," Leo whispered, his small voice cutting through the church lobby noise, "is it true you wish Mommy was gone?" The world tilted on its axis. My breath caught in my chest. Where does a child learn such a terrible, ugly thought? I looked over his head and saw Emily watching us, a flicker of something cold and triumphant in her eyes before she hid it. I shook my head, unable to speak, and he pulled his hand away from mine. The final thread between us had been frayed. That little boy's trust was broken, and I knew who held the scissors. I drove straight to my son's house, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I didn't wait for an invitation. When Kevin came to the door, I told him what his son had asked me. "You have to see what she's doing, Kevin," I pleaded. He just sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "Mum, you're putting everyone in a difficult position. Emily is trying. You're just not giving her a chance." He was defending her. He was choosing his wife's twisted stories over his own mother. He closed the door in my face, not unkindly, but firmly. The message was clear. I was on the outside now. I went home, my mind reeling, and picked up the old family tablet they'd left behind months ago, just wanting to see pictures of the kids. That's when I found the secret messages. The messages were between Emily and her sister. "The old woman is making it so easy," one read. "Kevin believes anything I say." My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the tablet. I knew then that I had to face her, but I never imagined it would happen like this. The following week was my granddaughter Maya's 6th birthday party. I walked in with a heavy heart, clutching 2 presents. One for Maya was a scrapbook I'd spent weeks making, filled with photos and stories of our time together. The other for Leo was a small toy truck so he wouldn't feel left out. This was my mistake. In front of the entire family, aunts, uncles, cousins, Emily made her move. She had the children open my gifts last. Then she held them up for everyone to see. "I just want everyone to see this," she announced, her voice dripping with fake sadness. A beautiful handmade book for Maya and a cheap toy for Leo. The room went silent. This is what I have to deal with. She's always picking favourites, trying to turn them against each other. She looked right at me, a single tear rolling down her cheek. That was the moment she openly accused me, shaming me in front of everyone I loved. I left the party without saying a word. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders. In the following days, a wall of silence went up. My calls to my son, Kevin, went to his voicemail, which was always full. My text messages, with their little blue check marks, were delivered and read, but never answered. The house, which used to be filled with the sound of my grandkids' laughter, was now so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. I was being erased from my own family, one ignored phone call at a time. I tried to fight it. I would drive by their house, a hollow ache in my chest, hoping to catch a glimpse of the children playing in the yard. One afternoon I saw them. Emily was watching from the porch, her arms crossed. As soon as she saw my car, she ushered them inside, the door closing like a final judgment. It was clear I wasn't just uninvited. I was a threat. The loneliness was the worst part. I had lost my husband years ago, and my son and his family were my entire world. Now, that world was gone. I was about to give up all hope. But one night, at a school fundraiser I went to just to feel close to them, my granddaughter Maya slipped away from her mother. In the chaos of the crowd, she ran to me, pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm and ran back before Emily even noticed. I waited until I was back in my car, parked under a flickering street lamp, to open the note. My fingers fumbled with the small square piece of notebook paper. It was covered in my granddaughter's wobbly crayon printing. "Grandma," it read, "I miss you. Mommy cries and says you hate her. She says you want to take us to live with you instead. I love Mommy too, Grandma. Please don't be mad at her." The crayon letters blurred as my eyes filled with tears. This was so much crueler than I had imagined. Emily wasn't just telling them I was mean or unfair. She was painting me as a villain who wanted to tear their family apart, forcing them to feel guilty for loving me. She was making my love for them a weapon against their mother. The pain was sharp and deep, but then something else sparked inside me. A cold, hard anger. The wounded animal inside me was tired of whimpering in the corner. If I kept letting her paint this picture of me, I would lose them forever. This wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. This was a war for my grandchildren's hearts. She had been playing a game of whispers and lies, and I had been losing badly because I didn't even know the rules. I folded the note, my tears drying on my cheeks. I realized I had to play Emily's game to beat her. The first step was to sound the retreat. The next morning I called Emily. My voice was meek, apologetic. I told her she was right, that I had been overbearing and hadn't respected her boundaries as a mother. It felt like swallowing broken glass, but I choked the words out. I begged her, please just let me come over for one short visit. Supervised. I just want to give the kids a present. She was suspicious, but my pathetic pleading must have satisfied her need for control. She agreed to 30 minutes the next day. I went to the store and bought the biggest, softest teddy bear I could find. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and performed careful surgery on its back seam, tucking a tiny, voice-activated audio recorder deep inside its stuffing. It was a desperate, crazy thing to do, but her words against mine would never be enough. I needed her voice, her own words, to be the weapon that finally brought her down. The visit was agony. I smiled and made small talk while my heart hammered against my ribs. I gave the bear to Maya and with a fake casualness said, "Why don't we put him on the shelf in the playroom so he can watch over all your toys?" The next day I called again, saying I thought I'd left my reading glasses. She let me in, annoyed, and while she was distracted, I retrieved the bear. When I pressed play later that night, what I heard made my knees buckle. I sat in my favourite armchair, the one my husband always used to sit in, and pressed play. The recording started with the muffled sounds of my grandchildren playing. Then, Emily's voice, sickly sweet. "Give the bear to Mommy," she said. "Let's see what Grandma gave you." There was a pause, and then her entire tone shifted. Her voice became a low, venomous hiss, clearly on the phone with someone. "You wouldn't believe the garbage she brought. Another attempt to buy their love." She laughed, a sound like cracking ice. "It doesn't matter. They're terrified of her now." My blood ran cold. The woman on the phone, her sister, asked what she'd been telling them. "Oh, the usual," Emily bragged, "but I added a new one. I told them their sweet old grandma wants to put them in an orphanage so she can have their daddy all to herself again. Leo cried for an hour." An orphanage. The word echoed in the silent room. She wasn't just lying. She was engaging in a form of psychological torture against her own children, using me as the boogeyman. This wasn't about insecurity. This was a darkness I couldn't comprehend. The recording continued, full of her plans, her mockery, her poison. I listened to it all, the evidence of her wickedness filling my quiet home. I finally had the truth in my hands, a truth so ugly it could burn their entire world to the ground. Armed with the recording, I called my son, Kevin. I didn't plead or accuse. I just said, "I have something you need to hear. It's important. Please, meet me." He agreed reluctantly to meet at a small coffee shop downtown. The 20-minute drive felt like an eternity. I sat across from him in a vinyl booth, my hands trembling as I placed my phone on the table between us. "Just listen, Kevin. That's all I ask." I pressed play. Emily's sweet voice filled the air, followed by the cruel, hissing tone she used with her sister. I watched my son's face. It went from annoyed to confused to pale with shock. He heard her talk about the orphanage. He heard her laugh. For a single, beautiful second, I saw the truth dawn in his eyes. And then he shut it out. He reached over and stabbed the stop button, the silence roaring back in. "I can't," he whispered, shaking his head. "Don't do this, Mom. She's my wife. This is sick." He stood up and walked away, leaving me alone in the booth. He chose the lie. He chose her. My proof, my undeniable truth meant nothing. It was the deepest cut of all. But someone else had been sitting at the table right next to us, and she had heard every single word. Carol Jensen. A woman stood by my table, her face etched with concern. It was Martha Gable, my old neighbour from the house next to Kevin's before she moved across town. "I am so terribly sorry," she said, gesturing to my phone. I couldn't help but overhear that voice. "Emily." I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. She sat down, her presence a small warm comfort in my cold despair. "That girl," she said, shaking her head. "She hasn't changed a bit, has she?" Suddenly, I wasn't alone. Here was someone who saw it, who knew. "You knew?" I asked. Martha sighed, her eyes full of a sad wisdom. "Oh, honey. I saw the way she spoke to you in the yard when she thought no one was looking. The little comments, the cold shoulders. It reminded me so much of her own mother. She told me about Emily's childhood, about a mother who praised with one hand and slapped with the other, constantly pitting Emily against her cousins. Emily's cruelty wasn't random, it was learned. She was a product of a poisoned home, and now she was poisoning mine. It didn't excuse her, but it was the first time I understood her. Then, Martha leaned in closer, her voice dropping. "Carol, this isn't the first time she's done this. She was engaged before she met Kevin. You need to talk to his mother." Martha Gable gave me a name and a phone number that felt like a lifeline. The woman's name was Sharon, and she was the mother of Emily's former fiancé. When I called her, I barely got my story out before she stopped me. "Let me guess," Sharon said, her voice weary and grim. "She accused you of playing favourites, of trying to undermine her. Did she cry and tell your son you were trying to break them up?" I sat in stunned silence as she described Emily's entire playbook, step by painful step. Sharon's son had been completely in Emily's thrall. He'd cut off his entire family for her. It was only after he finally called off the wedding, catching Emily in a lie about money, that he saw the truth. Sharon had saved everything. She forwarded me old emails and screenshots of text messages, a whole file of Emily's poison. In one text to a friend after the breakup, Emily had written, "His mum is probably celebrating. Too bad I had him wrapped around my finger." It was a documented pattern of destruction. This was who she was. The stakes suddenly felt immensely higher. This was no longer about me and my grandchildren. It was about saving my son from a predator who would eventually bleed him dry of his family, his money, and his spirit. I now had everything I needed. I had the tape and I had the history. I had proof, but I needed the perfect moment to use it. A direct confrontation wouldn't work. Kevin would just walk away again. I had to create a stage he couldn't leave. My late husband's birthday was coming up, a day our family had always honoured. Using that as my shield, I called Kevin and proposed a truce dinner at my house. "No drama," I promised, my voice soft and steady. "I'm tired of fighting. Let's just have a quiet meal for your father's sake." Emily, smelling victory and assuming I was finally surrendering, eagerly agreed. She wanted to sit at my table and watch me wave the white flag. The night of the dinner, my house was filled with a terrible tension. Emily was smug, Kevin was withdrawn, and the children were quiet and watchful. I served the roast chicken my husband had loved, my hands steady despite the storm raging inside me. I looked at Emily, smiling across my dinner table, and for a second, I felt a wave of doubt. Was I really about to detonate a bomb in the middle of my own family? The collateral damage would be immense. I took a deep breath, clutching the small remote for the digital recorder in my pocket. I waited for a lull in the conversation. This was it. I opened my mouth to speak, to finally light the fuse, but Emily was always one step ahead. Just as I was about to expose her, Emily stood up, clinking her glass with a spoon. "Kevin and I have some wonderful news," she announced to the silent table. "We've decided to move. It's a great job opportunity for Kevin out of state." She looked at me, her eyes gleaming with victory. "We just think the kids need a fresh start, away from all this drama." My plan was in ashes. She was taking them away, forever. My son Kevin wouldn't look at me. "It's for the best, Mom," he mumbled. But Emily wasn't finished. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small stack of letters tied with a ribbon. "And since we're clearing the air," she said, her voice trembling with fake emotion, "maybe you should explain these." She handed them to Kevin. "I found them in your mother's desk when I was looking for a pen." They were letters, written on my own stationery in handwriting that looked eerily like mine. They were forgeries, vile, cruel letters I had never seen, filled with fabricated complaints about my grandchildren. Kevin's face grew dark as he read. The trap I had set for her had snapped shut on me instead. Emily had produced forged letters, proving I spoke ill of my own grandchildren. "She calls Leo's learning disability a frustrating burden," Kevin read aloud, his voice thick with disbelief and disgust. He looked up from the forged letter, his eyes locking on mine. They held no confusion, no doubt, only a cold, hard certainty. "How could you, Mom? How could you write this about your own grandson?" I tried to speak, to tell him they were fake, but my words caught in my throat. Emily started to cry softly, a masterful performance of a wounded mother. "I told you, Kevin," she sobbed. "She's been trying to hurt us all along." The jury was my son and the verdict was guilty. The children watched, their faces pale, as their father turned on me. "All your talk about her lies," he said, his voice low and shaking with rage. "It was you. It was always you." He stood up, pulling a crying Emily into his arms. "We're done," he said, the words hitting me harder than any physical blow. "You will not call us. You will not come near the children. You are out of our lives." He turned and led my family out the door, leaving me standing in the ruins of my life. I watched their car's taillights disappear down the street, and a sharp, crushing pain exploded in my chest. My knees gave out, and the world went black. My family had cut me off. And then my health betrayed me too. I woke to the steady, rhythmic beeping of a machine and the sterile smell of antiseptic. A kind-faced doctor told me I hadn't had a heart attack, but a severe panic attack brought on by extreme stress. My body had simply given up under the weight of my broken heart. For 2 days I lay in that white, silent room, feeling the profound emptiness of being truly alone. The flowers on the windowsill were from my neighbour, Martha, not from my son. I asked a nurse if she could please try calling Kevin just to let him know where I was. She came back a few minutes later, her face full of pity. "I'm sorry, dear," she said gently. A woman answered and said he was unavailable. She also said to stop the theatrics. Emily. Of course. Even here she was guarding the gate, making sure I suffered alone. That was my lowest point. The fight was gone. I had lost. I closed my eyes, a single tear tracing a path down my temple, and surrendered to the silence. I must have drifted off to sleep because the next thing I knew, the light in the room had changed. The beeping of the machine was no longer the only sound. I opened my eyes and saw her standing there. It was Maya, my sweet 6-year-old granddaughter, standing by my bed. She was still in her pajamas, clutching the big teddy bear I had given her, the one that had held the recorder. Her eyes were huge and frightened, and she had clearly snuck out of her house and walked the 3 blocks to the hospital by herself. I sat up, my own pain forgotten, and opened my arms. She crawled onto the bed and buried her face in my side, her small body trembling. "I was scared, Grandma," she sobbed quietly. "Daddy is so sad all the time." She told me that her mother, Emily, had told him my hospital stay was just another one of my tricks to get attention. She said her mummy was happy they were moving so that mean old Grandma couldn't bother them anymore. Hearing those words from my granddaughter's mouth reignited the fire inside me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting these children from their mother's poison. I held her tight, stroking her hair. She looked up at me, her eyes shining with tears and a secret. She leaned in close, her little hand covering her mouth as if she was afraid of being overheard even here. She whispered something that changed everything. "Mommy makes us practice," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the hospital equipment. She has a book. A special book. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. A book? What was she talking about? My granddaughter saw the confusion on my face and elaborated, her words tumbling out in a rush of confession. She writes down stories about you in it, Maya said. Bad stories. And she makes me and Leo memorize them. She calls it our secret game. A new, horrifying layer of her deception. Emily wasn't just lying to the children. She was forcing them to become her accomplices. She was actively coaching them to lie about me. Maya told me if they forgot a line from one of the stories or said something nice about me, they would lose their screen time or have to go to bed early. They were trapped, forced to betray their own grandmother to please their mother. This was systematic abuse. My heartbreak morphed into a cold, hard rage. "Where does she keep it, sweetie?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Maya told me it was in her mother's bedside table in a locked box. It wasn't a diary. It was a script. And I was going to burn it to the ground. The moment the hospital discharged me, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The pain was gone, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. I drove straight to my neighbour Martha's house and told her everything Maya had whispered to me in that hospital room, about the special book, the secret game, the scripted lies. Martha, ever practical, listened without interruption, her lips tightening into a thin, determined line. "A script," she said, her voice grim. "We need to get that script." We knew a direct confrontation would fail. A quiet family talk was impossible. I had tried to play by the rules of a game Emily had rigged from the start. Now I had to change the venue, the players, and the stakes. We couldn't do this behind closed doors where she could control the narrative. We had to bring her into the light, where her lies would wither under scrutiny. The plan began to form, piece by painful piece. It was my final chance. If it failed, Emily would pack up my son and my grandchildren and disappear from my life forever. The risk was enormous, but for the first time in months I felt a flicker of hope. I was no longer the victim. I was the storm that was coming for her, and this time the whole community would be watching. I went to see our pastor the next day. Pastor Dave was a kind, reasonable man who had known my family for 30 years. I didn't show him all my cards at once. I spoke of a terrible family misunderstanding, of my fears about my son moving away, of my desperation to heal the rift before it was too late. "Please," I asked him, my voice trembling with genuine emotion, "would you be willing to host a reconciliation meeting? A mediation? I think they'll listen to you." As I'd hoped, he saw it as his Christian duty. He called Kevin and Emily, framing it as a loving gesture from a concerned mother. Kevin, burdened by guilt, agreed immediately. Emily, so confident in her own power, saw it as a public stage to play the magnanimous victim one last time. She accepted without hesitation. We met 2 days later in the pastor's quiet, sunlit office. The air was thick with unspoken words. I sat on one side of his large oak desk, my heart pounding a steady rhythmic beat of war. Kevin sat opposite me, his face a mask of misery. And then the door opened, and Emily swept in, a vision of sorrowful grace in a blue dress. She looked at me, her eyes full of fake pity. Emily walked in with a smile sharper than a knife. Pastor Dave began gently, speaking of grace and forgiveness. Emily played her part beautifully, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "I just love this family so much," she said, her voice catching. "It breaks my heart that Carol has been so unwell. Her accusations, her instability. It's been so hard on the children." She recounted her twisted stories, the birthday party, the favoritism, the constant undermining. She was smooth, polished, and utterly convincing. My son, Kevin, just stared at the floor, trapped in her web. I let her speak, let her spin her lies in the holy silence of the pastor's office. I let her build her prison, lie by lie. The pastor, seeking to find a path to resolution, turned to a small detail. "Emily," he said kindly. "Carol seemed very upset about an incident involving cookies. Could you tell me what happened from your perspective?" For the first time, Emily faltered. It was such a minor point in her grand performance, she'd forgotten the specifics of the lie. "Oh, that," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "She just gave them far too much sugar right before bed. It's a small thing, but it's part of the pattern." It was a clumsy, vague answer, a slight deviation from the story I'd overheard. Her mask cracked for just 1 second. It was the signal. I nodded slightly toward the door, which opened a moment later. My ally, Martha Gable, walked in, holding my granddaughter Maya's hand. Emily shot to her feet. "What is this? What is she doing here? You have no right," she hissed, her mask of gentility vanishing. But Pastor Dave held up a hand. "Please sit down, Emily. I'd like to hear from the child." He knelt in front of Maya. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "your grandma told me about a secret game you play with your mommy. Can you tell me about it?" Maya, clutching the teddy bear, looked from her mother's furious face to mine. She took a shaky breath. "Mommy has a book," she said, her little voice clear as a bell in the silent room. "She makes us practice the stories about Grandma. She says we have to be her little soldiers." She started to cry. "I don't want to play anymore." Kevin let out a choked sob, the sound of a man's world breaking apart. He looked at Emily, truly looked at her for the first time. The truth was right there, in the terrified eyes of his own daughter. But Emily had a counterattack ready. "See what she's done!" Emily shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She's brainwashed her. She's a child. She'll say anything her precious grandma tells her to say. This is what I've been protecting my children from." Her pivot was masterful, turning my evidence into proof of her own claims. For a moment, doubt flickered again across Kevin's face. It was a child's word against his wife's. "You're right, Emily. It is a terrible thing to manipulate family," I said, my voice cold and calm. "Which brings me to the letters." Martha stepped forward and placed a file on the pastor's desk. "Pastor Dave," Martha said, "I had a forensic document examiner, a handwriting expert, analyze the letters Emily found. I also provided him with Emily's signature from her marriage certificate. She slid a single sheet of paper from the file. This is his sworn affidavit. It confirms with 100% certainty that the person who signed the marriage certificate is the same person who forged those cruel letters." The air left the room. Kevin stared at the affidavit, then at Emily. Her face, drained of all colour, was a mask of pure fury. The lies were gone. The stage was gone. All that was left was the monster underneath. And then her composure didn't just crack. It violently shattered. She lunged forward, screaming, not at me, but at her own daughter. "You little snake! You ruined it all!" My son Kevin and the pastor had to physically pull Emily away from our terrified granddaughter. The rage that contorted Emily's face was something primal and ugly. All the layers of her careful performance had been burned away, and the monster was finally visible to everyone in the room. She thrashed in my son's arms, spitting curses, her eyes wild. In that moment, she wasn't a victim or a misunderstood wife. She was a cornered predator. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by Emily's ragged breathing. Kevin stared at his wife, his face pale with a horror so profound it seemed to age him in an instant. He finally looked at me, and for the first time in over a year I saw my son again. The fog of her influence was gone. "Mum," he whispered, his voice cracking. I knew something was wrong. There were so many little things that didn't add up. I didn't want to see it." It was the confession I had longed to hear, the first crack in the wall between us. But Emily, seeing her control over him slipping away, suddenly went still. Her body relaxed, and a cold, calculating look replaced the rage in her eyes. She wasn't done yet, she had one last weapon. Emily calmly straightened her dress, though my son still held her arms. She looked him directly in the eyes, her voice dropping to a chilling, quiet threat. "Fine," she said, the word cutting through the tense silence. "You want her? You can have her, but you can't have us all." She nodded towards me, a contemptuous smirk on her lips. "You choose, Kevin. You can have your mother, who has done nothing but try to tear our family apart, or you can have your children." Her words hung in the air, a poison more potent than any of her previous lies. "Because I swear to you," she continued, "if you choose her, you will never see Leo or Maya again. I will take them so far away, and I will spend every single day of their lives making sure they know their father abandoned them for his mommy." My blood ran cold. This was her final move. The one I hadn't anticipated. She was holding my grandchildren hostage. I watched my son's face, saw the terror in his eyes as he pictured a life without his children. He was hesitating. The monster was threatening to take everything, and he was actually considering it. And then the door swung open. Standing in the doorway was Sharon, the mother of Emily's ex-fiancé, and beside her was a calm, professional-looking woman with a briefcase. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Pastor," Sharon said, "but I believe you need to hear from us." The woman stepped forward. "My name is Ms. Davis. I'm from Child Protective Services." Emily's face went white. My friend Martha, it turned out, had a backup plan. She had called Sharon, who in turn had called her contact at social services, telling them to be ready. When Emily became violent, Martha sent a single text. "Now." The final devastating blow. "Emily Jensen," Ms. Davis said, reading from a file, "we have a documented report against you from 5 years ago in Cleveland, Ohio. A complaint was filed concerning the emotional abuse of a minor, your former fiancé's nephew. The case was closed when you left the state. It wasn't just Sharon's story anymore. It was an official record, a pattern." The social worker looked up from her file, her gaze landing on my weeping granddaughter. "Given your documented history," she said, her voice firm, "and your violent outburst today in the presence of your child, we're going to need you to come with us." Emily didn't have any more tricks. No more lies, no more stages to perform on. Her carefully woven web of deceit had been set on fire, and she was now just the spider, exposed and powerless. 2 uniformed police officers who had been waiting discreetly in the church hallway stepped in at the social worker's signal. The pastor, his face a grim mask of disappointment, simply nodded at them to proceed. The community that Emily had tried so hard to charm and manipulate was now her judge and jury. My son, Kevin, had released her arms and stepped back, looking at the woman he married as if she were a total stranger. The entire world he had built with her was a lie, and the foundation was crumbling beneath his feet. Maya ran to me, burying her face in my dress, and I held her tight, shielding her from the final ugly moments of her mother's reign. As the officers led a sputtering Emily towards the door, she looked back at Kevin, her eyes filled with a venomous hatred. She screamed one last lie. "He'll get tired of you, old woman. They'll all leave you in the end." But no one believed her anymore. The door to the pastor's office clicked shut, leaving behind a deafening silence. The storm had passed, leaving nothing but wreckage. The social worker had taken Emily for questioning, and Martha had gently led my grandchildren to the church playroom, giving us a moment alone. It was just me and my son standing in the ruins of our family. Kevin stood frozen, staring at the door where his wife had disappeared. I could almost see the last 10 years of his life flashing before his eyes, every lie, every excuse, every moment he chose her over the truth replaying in his mind. He was a man waking from a long and terrible dream. He sank into a chair, his face in his hands, and his shoulders began to shake with deep, gut-wrenching sobs. It was the sound of a heart-breaking, of shame, of a profound and terrible awakening. He had been a willing captive, and he had to face the part he had played. He had to accept that he had failed to protect his children, and he had failed to protect me. After a long moment, he finally looked up. His face was streaked with shame and regret. He took a shaky step towards me. He turned to me with tears in his eyes. "Mum," Kevin sobbed, his voice choked with a pain so deep it seemed to come from his soul. "Mum, I'm so sorry. I was so blind. Can you ever forgive me?" I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, now a broken man standing in the wreckage of his life. The anger I had held for so long was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. "Forgiveness is a long road, Kevin," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "Right now, what matters are the children." As if on cue, Martha brought Leo and Maya back into the room. They saw their father crying, and they saw me, standing with my arms open. The fear that had lived in their eyes for so long was finally gone. Leo, my brave little boy who had been turned against me, took one hesitant step and then another before breaking into a run. He crashed into me, his arms wrapping tightly around my waist. "Grandma," he cried into my dress. "I'm sorry I believed her." Maya joined him, and I knelt, pulling both of my grandchildren into an embrace I thought I might never feel again. I breathed in the scent of their hair, feeling their small, warm bodies pressed against mine. The war was over. The poison was gone. We were together. But as I held them close, I knew this wasn't just an ending. It was a new, and perhaps more difficult, beginning. Months have passed since that day. Emily is gone, tangled in a legal system that will hopefully prevent her from harming another family. My son Kevin is fighting for and will get sole custody. He and the children are living with me for now. My house is no longer silent. It is filled with the sound of laughter, the smell of dinosaur-shaped pancakes, and the clumsy, beautiful noise of a family healing. Kevin is quieter now, humbled. He is slowly, painfully, rebuilding the trust he broke. I have reclaimed my place, not as a guest in my family's life, but as its heart, its matriarch. I have forgiven my son, because a mother's love is a stubborn, resilient thing, but I have not forgotten the lessons learned in the fire. "Love cannot be blind, Kevin," I told him one evening as we washed the dishes together. "You must see people for who they truly are, not just who you wish them to be." We are building our new life on a foundation of honesty, brick by painful brick. But I am a wiser woman now. I know that every family has its secrets and some aren't buried as deep as you think. Friend, thank you for staying with me to the very end. If you believe that strength isn't about how you fall but how you get back up, then please tap subscribe and join our community. You won't want to miss the stories we share next.